Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, August 31st, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Senators say that the U.S. is getting its money's worth in Ukraine. So fresh from a trip to Kiev, Senator Richard Blumenthal, he's a Democrat from Connecticut, he's arguing that the U.S. is getting its money's worth in Ukraine because Russia is taking losses and no Americans are dying, which shows a lack of concern for Ukrainian lives, which seems typical of U.S. officials. So Blumenthal wrote in the Connecticut Post, quote, "Even Americans who have no particular interest in freedom and independence in democracies worldwide should be satisfied that we're getting our money's worth on our Ukraine investment. For less than 3% of our nation's military budget, we've enabled Ukraine to degrade Russia's military strength by half, all without a single American servicewoman or man injured or lost," end quote. So this argument has become a pretty common talking point among hawks in Washington who want the U.S. to keep fueling the proxy war against Russia. Senator Mitt Romney, Republican from Utah, recently called the conflict, quote, "the best national defense spending I think we've ever done," end quote. So the best spending the U.S. has ever done is on this horrific proxy war in Ukraine. And so Romney went on to say, quote, "We're losing no lives in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are fighting heroically against Russia. We're diminishing and devastating the Russian military for a very small amount of money. A weakened Russia is a good thing," end quote. So I think these comments show that there's no question, that this is a proxy war against Russia and that the U.S., the whole goal here is to hurt Russia and, covering all this stuff about how the U.S. knew the counteroffensive would be a failure and still pushed for it anyway. I think it's pretty clear that, regaining territory wasn't really the U.S. goal. They just want to keep Russia bogged down in this war. That's what it seems like is the case. And these comments from Romney and Blumenthal, they come, amid this faltering counteroffensive. And despite the lack of success on the battlefield, the Biden administration and most members of Congress want to keep funding the war, which they acknowledge would not continue without U.S. support. And this is something Ukrainian officials say. So Blumenthal said, quote, "As Zelensky is frank and forthcoming to say, Ukraine could not have survived without America and our allies, but his counteroffensive is far from an assured success. In the end, the only way he loses is if America pulls the plug," end quote. And really, the only way he negotiates is if America pulls the plug. Without this support, Ukraine would be forced to negotiate and this war would end. And Ukraine's not going to get what it wanted, but, that's just the reality on the ground. And the Washington Post recently reported that U.S. intelligence has determined Ukraine's counteroffensive will fail to meet its main objective. So again, I think this is clear. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said this back in April 2022, that one of the goals in Ukraine is to weaken Russia. That was right after the West pressured Ukraine not to negotiate with Russia when there was actually a chance to reach a peace deal in the early days of the war. But nope. They want to keep this thing going to try to hurt Russia as much as they can. Who cares about all these Ukrainian lives that are lost? This is a great deal, the best money we've ever spent. It's just really horrific. All right, the next one here. Russia says that Ukraine attacks are not possible without help from the West. So this is a response to all these Ukrainian drone attacks we've seen. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said Wednesday that Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia would not be possible without help from the West. And this was reported by Russia's TASS news agency. The report said, quote, "Zakharova stressed that the Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles would not have been able to travel such a distance without information feeds from Western satellites," end quote. The comments came after drones targeted 6 Russian regions early Wednesday in what is believed to be the largest Ukrainian drone attack on Russia since Russia invaded Ukraine last year. And one of the Russian cities, as I covered yesterday, that was targeted was Pskov, which is about 20 miles from the border of Estonia, which is a NATO member. I haven't seen any kind of accusations from Russia that they think the drones came from Estonia, but they're saying they think that they wouldn't have been able to come all that way without U.S. support, because that city's over 400 miles from the Ukrainian border. So, and this huge drone attack, it came after the Washington Post reported that the U.S. expected operations inside Russia to increase, and The Economist reported that Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia use intelligence often from Western partners. So I think it is pretty clear that they are enabling these attacks inside Russia despite what the Biden administration is claiming. And Zakharova added that the attacks will not go unpunished. And I think it looks like there's more drone attacks inside Russia early Thursday. So seems like they're really going to keep ramping these things up. All right, the next one here. Ukraine blasts Pope Francis for an address to Russian youth. So Ukrainian officials have sharply criticized Pope Francis for an address that he gave to young Russian Catholics, accusing him of spreading imperialist propaganda for saying Russians should be proud of their heritage. So this was last week. Pope Francis gave an address to a Russian youth Catholic group that was in St. Petersburg. He did a video address, and he said, quote, "Never forget your heritage. You are the descendants of great Russia, the great Russia of saints, rulers, the great Russia of Peter I, Catherine II, that empire, educated, great culture, and great humanity. Never give up on this heritage. You are descendants of the great Mother Russia. Step forward with it, and thank you. Thank you for your way of being, Russian," end quote. So a spokesman for the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry slammed the Pope's speech and said, quote, "This is the kind of imperialist propaganda, spiritual bonds, and the need to save great Mother Russia, which the Kremlin uses to justify the murder of thousands of Ukrainians and the destruction of hundreds of Ukrainian towns and villages," end quote. So this isn't really anything new. The Pope has been pretty neutral in his rhetoric about the war, but this isn't related to the war. He's just talking to a group of, Russian Catholics. What if he's talking to a group of American Catholics and said you should be proud of your, heritage of the Revolutionary War? Does that mean that he's justifying, American wars in the Middle East? I think it's pretty ridiculous, and that the Vatican responded on Wednesday, and they said it was clear that he was not pushing any sort of imperialist agenda based on what he said. The director of the Holy See's press office said, quote, "In the words of greeting addressed to several young Russian Catholics a few days ago, as is clear from the context in which he pronounced them, the Pope intended to encourage young people to preserve and promote what is positive in Russia's great cultural and spiritual heritage, and certainly not to exalt imperialistic logic and governmental personalities, cited to indicate certain historical periods of reference," end quote. So Ukrainian officials, again, have criticized him before. And one thing, Pope Francis was talking about Daria Dugina, who's the daughter of Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin. So Dugina was killed by a car bomb outside of Moscow. This was in August 2022 in an operation carried out by Ukrainian intelligence. They've essentially admitted that they were behind it. And Francis said, that it described her as a poor girl and that she was an innocent that was paying the price of war. And Ukraine reacted very sharply. They summoned a Vatican envoy. They were not happy that they said that because Dugina did support the war in Ukraine. But I mean, you think of that attitude again, put it into context. Does that mean Americans who support wars that America is involved in, does that mean that they're legitimate targets if they're civilians? So this is just the attitude. I think, these types of stories really show the attitude of this government, that we're giving all this money to and supporting. When I say we, I mean the United States government, not me. All right, the next one here, the U.S. okays foreign military financing for Taiwan. So the Biden administration has approved the first ever military aid package for Taiwan using foreign military financing, FMF, which is a State Department program that gives foreign governments money to buy U.S. arms. So the Associated Press noted that FMF is typically reserved for sovereign, independent states and that the U.S. does not recognize Taiwan as a country. U.S. officials told AP that the only other time this type of aid has been used for a non-nation state was assistance to the African Union, which is interesting. The African Union is a bloc of 55 African states, and they do have a military force. So this military aid package is worth $80 million, which might not seem like much in context with everything that the U.S. has been giving Ukraine. And the U.S. did not disclose the contents of the package in its notification to Congress. So the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act included $2 billion in foreign military financing funds for Taiwan, and this marks the first time that these funds have been used. And this assistance is going to infuriate China, as Beijing is opposed to military ties between Washington and Taipei, especially new unprecedented support, which is what this is. Back in July, the Biden administration provided Taiwan with a $345 million arms package using the Presidential Drawdown Authority, also for the first time, and that's the authority that lets the U.S. send weapons directly from U.S. military stockpiles. It's the primary way they're arming Ukraine. So again, both the foreign military financing and Presidential Drawdown for Taiwan is unprecedented in this since the U.S. normalized relations with China. The U.S. has sold weapons to Taiwan since 1979 when they cut off diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but they've never financed the purchases, and they have never provided weapons free of charge. So this stuff really angers China. And, the argument in Washington among China hawks is that they need to arm Taiwan to the teeth to prevent a Chinese attack. But the increasing U.S. military and diplomatic support for Taiwan has, China has responded by putting the island under more military pressure. So, I think this is going to make war more likely, this type of assistance. All right, the next one here, the British Parliament calls Taiwan an independent country. So an influential group of British members of Parliament referred to Taiwan as an independent country in a report issued on Wednesday as British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly is visiting China. So the language was used in a report issued by the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Commons, which is Britain's lower house of Parliament. And this marked the first time that British lawmakers referred to Taiwan as an independent country in an official government document. So this document read, quote, Taiwan is already an independent country under the name Republic of China. Taiwan possesses all the qualifications for statehood, including a permanent population, a defined territory, government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. It is only lacking greater international recognition, end quote. So this report, of course, drew a stern rebuke from Beijing as the status of Taiwan is a major red line for China. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin said, quote, Taiwan is an inalienable part of China's territory. The relevant report of the British Parliament blatantly referred to Taiwan as an independent country, which distorts the facts and is totally misleading, end quote. So Conservative Party MP Alicia Kearns, she is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, she told Politico that they acknowledge China's position but do not accept it. She added that it is imperative that the foreign secretary, vocally stands up for Taiwan while he's in China. So this is interesting. According to Taipei Times, Cleverly downplayed the report, saying that it's not a UK government document. It's the Conservative Party, which is the ruling party. It's not like it's the opposition party that leads this committee. And he insists that London's stance has remained consistent, that there should be no change to the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. The report also criticized the government of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for its China policy, saying that they could pursue closer ties to Taiwan if they weren't so scared of China. So what's interesting about this is that unlike the US, the British have never had formal relations with Taiwan, as the Republic of China. They recognized the Beijing-based People's Republic of China in 1950, which was not long after Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces fled to Taiwan in 1949, which ended the Chinese Civil War. We could argue that it never really ended because they are based in Taiwan. So the UK and the PRC established full diplomatic relations in 1972. You see what they did here. They issued this report while the foreign minister was in China. I think that the China hawks in Congress might take a page out of this book in the future and do something like this. I wouldn't be surprised if that new House China Committee calls Taiwan an independent country. And it might seem silly to people, but this is, the whole basis of, U.S. and China relations is the status over Taiwan. So the U.S. doing it would be even more, that would anger China even more. All right, so the next one here, another regime in French Africa is toppled. So there was another coup in Africa on Wednesday, and these kind of seem like common occurrences now. And this was in Gabon. And this article is from Joe Loria at Consortium News. He writes, wild celebrations have broken out on the streets of Gabon cities on Wednesday after a military junta announced on television that it had put President Ali Bongo Ondimba under house arrest and had seized power. So the Bongo family had ruled the former French colony since 1967. Ali Bongo was the wealthiest man in Gabon with an estimated $1 billion in assets. So ruling Gabon has been very good for the Bongo family. The coup took place just after the country's electoral commission declared that he won a third term. And it's the fifth coup in West Africa, in a West African country once ruled directly by France since August 2020 when Mali fell to military leaders. I think Gabon is technically, even though it's on the West Coast and on the Atlantic coast, it's technically considered Central Africa. If you're watching here, you could see the map where it's located. So it's below where Africa kind of sticks out into the Atlantic. And they're not a member of ECOWAS, which is the bloc of West African states that is threatening intervention in Niger over the coup. But they were also a former French colony. Loria just goes over how there was military coups in Burkina Faso, September 2022, in Guinea in September 2021, and of course in Niger last month, and now in Gabon on Wednesday. And the pressure is growing on Paris as the coups are directed against France's continuing neo-colonial rule of West Africa. The push to get France out is being buoyed by a growing confidence of developing countries in the emergence of a multilateral world. So the African Union and France have condemned the coup. So France has 350 troops in Gabon. I couldn't figure out the number of U.S. troops in Gabon. I believe there's a small number, probably less than 350. We'll probably find out in the coming days. I'm sure Nick Turse at The Intercept is going to be covering this. And we'll find out if these guys were trained by the U.S. like many of these coup leaders were. But it seems like they have a lot of popular support, this coup, lots of people celebrating. And then the next one that we have here is actually another one from Consortium News, and it's background about this Bongo family and their 56-year rule over Gabon. And the leader that was thrown out, he came in 2009. His father was the leader from 1967 to 2009, and they held power, through corruption and controlling, one-party rule was basically what it was. And they, changed the Constitution to extend term limits and things like that. So this article is by Douglas Gaetz. It's actually a reprint from American Graduate School in Paris. But some good background there if you want to check that out. I need to mention, again, that it is our fundraiser at antiwar.com. So if you could go to antiwar.com/donate, you could see the different ways that you can support us. We have a letter from John Mearsheimer in the blog that we sent out by email today on Wednesday. It's really great to be endorsed by him because he's such an important voice in the current situation, with his view on Ukraine and how he predicted, what would happen there. And it's interesting, you see his lectures and interviews on YouTube. They get millions and millions of views, so people are listening to him. And I'm sure he is influencing kind of the growing opposition in the U.S. to this proxy war. So it's great to have him, support us. And he said, give generously to antiwar.com. So please do that. And another reason to do it is so you don't have to hear me talking about it all the time. So antiwar.com/donate. And again, we have matching funds. So keep that in mind. And the next one here, Matt Gaetz wants the Pentagon to answer for training coup leaders. So this article is from Nick Turse at The Intercept, and they published this very early Wednesday morning, right before this coup in Gabon. And this is about how Matt Gaetz, a representative from Florida, he has authored an amendment to the 2024 Defense Spending Bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, to collect information on trainees who overthrew their governments. It would require the Pentagon for the first time to inform Congress about U.S.-mentored mutineers. And Gaetz explained this to Turse in an exclusive interview. So he got this amendment through, the House panel, but it's not clear if it's going to be in the final NDAAs. The House and the Senate still need to negotiate this, but hopefully we get some more transparency about, U.S. operations in Africa just in general. I mean, it's something I'm so ignorant about myself. I have a lot to learn about this part of the world and, U.S. involvement there. So, hopefully all this ends with the U.S. having to get out. If these coup leaders just want to kick out France and then want to kick out the U.S., we don't need to be involved over there. The counterterrorism has been a complete failure. And, the U.S. says it cares about democracy. So if there's all these military juntas, then that has also been a failure. So we'll see if that amendment makes it through to the final NDAA. Okay, so the next one here is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Dozens killed by fighting among America's Syrian allies. So over 30 people were killed in a battle between the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is the SDF, that's the Kurdish-led force, and they were fighting against the Deir ez-Zor Military Council, the DEMC. And both the SDF and the DEMC are supported by the United States. So fighting erupted between the two groups when the SDF captured the leader of the DEMC, Abu Khalwal. So I butchered that name. But they captured him during a meeting on Sunday. In total, 32 people, including 3 civilians, were killed amid the clashes. Sources now report that fighting between SDF and DEMC has ceased as they've agreed that the leader that they seized is going to step down. So on Wednesday, the SDF claimed that his detention is due to committing multiple crimes, including drug trafficking, and coordinating with external entities hostile to the revolution. The statement suggests the SDF was unhappy with his outreach to the Syrian government. And these two groups are this has been a common thing, U.S. involvement in Syria. It used to be much more common. There's kind of that meme that goes around that, of like a news headline that says, militias in Syria funded by the CIA are fighting militias in Syria funded by the Pentagon. That's how much of a mess U.S. policy has been in this country, and this is part of it. And I know the SDF, they're led by the Kurds. They've had a lot of issues with the Arab populations in northeast Syria that, cities that they captured that were Arab majority, and they didn't want to give up. So there's always been issues there, kind of tensions between them. And now dozens of people are killed in this fighting. All right, so the last one here, North Korea test fires missiles amid U.S. war games. So this was from Connor Freeman at the Libertarian Institute. So hours after the U.S. flew bombers in separate joint air drills with Tokyo and Seoul, North Korea test fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles. And this comes as Kim Jong-un has warned that increased military provocations by the U.S., Japan, and South Korea could cause a nuclear war. They are very unhappy with that trilateral military alliance that is growing. So with these annual war games that the U.S. and South Korea were involved in, a U.S. B-1B bomber flew alongside South Korean F-A-50 jets and American F-16s. And this marks Washington's 10th such bomber flight this year to the Korean Peninsula, and they weren't sending bombers to the Korean Peninsula for about 5 years, and now it's very common. And the 11-day exercise involves tens of thousands of troops from both countries and will run until August 31st. Pyongyang has denounced the drills as war rehearsals and responded by conducting a missile launch last week. And there's also trilateral exercises with Tokyo, and they're saying that these ballistic missile tests, this is North Korea, they're saying that it simulated a nuclear strike mission. So, tensions just continue to grow and grow between North and South Korea and the U.S. And, just doesn't seem like the U.S. is interested at all in kind of easing things over there. That's it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints. We have one from Martin Sif. By now, Jake Sullivan expected Russia to be destroyed. One from Ted Galen Carpenter, The Real Malignancy in America's Justice System. And we have one from William Hartung and Dylan Fisher. Oh, so Ted's is over at the American Conservative. And then one from William Hartung and Dylan Fisher. Buying and selling arms stock while voting on war should be illegal. And that's over at Responsible Statecraft. And we have one from David Bromwich, Living on a War Planet. And that is an original at antiwar.com, originally posted at Tom Dispatch. So go check that out. And our spotlight for today by Jim Bovard over at the Libertarian Institute. Fallujah is not a presidential victory lap. That's about DeSantis bragging about his time in Iraq during the presidential debate. But that's it for everything for today. Also, I want to mention again, if you guys are in the area, the Ron Paul Institute Conference is going to be on Saturday, September 2nd. If you listen to this show, you're going to be very, very interested. Tickets are $75. There's still tickets available. And Dan McAdams is going to speak. He's Ron Paul's co-host, and other people you might know. Anya Parmpil of the Gray Zone, Jeff Dice, formerly head of the Mises Institute, and Max Blumenthal, Michael Vlahos, Colonel Douglas McGregor, and of course Ron Paul to close it out. I went last year, and I hope to go again next year when I can. It's a really great event. And I think anybody that likes this show, that likes antiwar.com, will like it. We'll have a great time. And you can, again, I'll put the link in the description. If it's kind of last minute now, but if you're free Saturday and you can make it, I think it'll definitely be worth your time. But that is it. So again, please help us with our fundraiser, antiwar.com/donate. If you can't do that, like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you watch. If you listen, you can leave a review. Follow us on Twitter. Share the show. Share antiwar.com. Tell your friends. Another heads up, next week, I'm going to be taking 2 days off at the end of the week. So there's going to be a show Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but no Thursday, Friday. We got a baby coming on September 6th, so very exciting. But then I should be back the following week for a full week, normal week. That's it. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.